More than 2,000 years ago, Plato said the universe is a single living creature that contains all living creatures within it. And the theme here, Awakening, is intimacy with a living universe. Awakening is intimacy with a living universe. It isn't something that simply happens inside of our physical bodies. It has to do with our relationship with the totality of the cosmos. And what I want to do is to explore through the lens of science and the lens of the world's wisdom traditions the nature of that connection. Because as Drew was saying, it is the nature of that connection that then unfolds and creates the entire world around us. So I want to go into the world of science briefly and into the world of spirituality and explore the nature of that connection. First, let's look at the world of science. We don't have time to really go deeply into this, other speakers have, but a key question is whether the universe should be regarded as it is traditionally now, more as dead matter and empty space, or is it itself a living system as Plato suggested? If we look at the universe, first thing that we can see is that we're learning it's almost entirely invisible. Not only is the 5% of the material world that exists largely invisible, but 95% of the known universe is invisible. We call it dark matter, dark energy. It's called dark because we can't see it. It is invisible. And we're a part of the universe, so I assume that 95% of myself and you, it's invisible. And we're speaking in a large way about that invisible aspect of ourselves. Secondly, we know the universe is a unified whole. Quantum physics has proven again and again, non-locality, that everything connects with everything else in a unified universe. Thirdly, through the lens of science, we have seen that there's enormous energy that's not only present, but also flowing through the universe. The physicist David Bohm said that a single cubic centimeter of empty space contains millions of atomic bombs of energy. There's immense amounts of energy, not only in our universe, but it's flowing through it. Consciousness, sentience, a knowing capacity that's appropriate to the form where it is found. We're finding that throughout the universe, not only in animals, but also in plants, clear down to single-celled organisms, and now down to the atomic level. The eminent physicist Freeman Dyson said about the electrons moving in the electron shell, they seem to move as if they had a mind of their own. As if they had a mind of their own. Now, if consciousness is down there at the atomic level, it means that consciousness was there with the birth of the universe, because that's when atomic matter formed. And what we then have is a universe that's co-evolving matter and consciousness throughout these billions of years. Lastly, freedom. Quantum physics is saying at the foundations of the universe, it isn't a machine, it isn't deterministic, it's probabilistic, and that means that we live in a universe that has freedom at its very foundations. Now, if we begin to put all of these qualities together, and there are more, we can ask, does this point towards a dead or a living universe? And I would suggest it points towards the universe as a living system. So we can go back to Plato and say, yes, 2,000 years ago and more, he was right. The universe is a single living creature, and it contains all living creatures within it. And so then the question is, what is the nature of our relationship with that aliveness? What we're seeing in conferences like this is that we're moving from a view of the universe from mostly dead matter and empty space to that of a living system. That means our aliveness participates in the aliveness of a larger system. And I wanted to explore the nature of that connection. The cosmologist Brian Swimme says that at every moment the universe emerges out of an all-nourishing abyss. The universe emerges out of an all-nourishing abyss. So it isn't simply that we're interrelated in a lateral sense. It is that the universe, in the new science, the universe is emerging in its totality at every moment, every moment, every moment. And the intelligence and energy that has the capacity to create the entire universe is also flowing through us. So there's two kinds of connections. There's the lateral connection of participation, and then there's the deep connection of the emergent universe, a co-arising universe, where the energy of and intelligence of the universe is flowing through us. Okay, let's turn to the world's wisdom traditions. How do they regard the universe? This has been a fascinating study for me for the last 30 years. So let's quickly go through the wisdom traditions of the world. First, Christianity. The famous mystic Meister Eckhart said, God is creating the entire universe fully and totally in this present now. Everything God created, creates now all at once. Very similar to what Brian Swim was saying, the universe emerging at every moment out of an all-nourishing abyss. Being created right now at every moment. We turn then to Islam and the wisdom of Rumi. And Rumi says, every moment the world is renewed, but we, in seeing its continuity of appearance, are unaware of it being renewed. Life is like a stream. It arrives new and fresh at every moment while it appears constant in its material form. Same theme that was coming from Christianity. We turn to Hinduism. Here we see the image of Shiva, the dancing Shiva. Shiva is dancing out the creation of the universe. That's what that image is about. And from Sri Nisargadatta, we see this quote, which is reflective of the Hindu thought. The entire universe contributes incessantly to your existence, hence the entire universe is your body. Turn to Buddhism. The Buddha described his awakening as the knowing of the interdependent co-arising of reality. Not only an interdependent reality, but co-arising. So there's a lateral connectivity, and there's an emergent vertical connectivity that is described in the Buddha's awakening. A contemporary Zen priest, D.T. Suzuki, says, "My solemn proclamation is that a new universe is created at every moment." Taoism, the wisdom of Lao Tzu, the Tao is the sustaining life force and the mother of all things. From it all things rise and fall without cease. The Tao is the mother of the universe. And we live in a daughter universe. There is a deeper generative ground, a mother universe that is sustaining and holding and giving birth to us moment by moment by moment. Indigenous or first peoples, from the Lakota tradition, we see the thought that there is no such thing as emptiness in the world. Everywhere there's life, visible and invisible. The Kalahari Bushmen, as well as the Aborigines in Australia, have the thought that there is a dream dreaming us. And the Mother Universe is the deeper dream time out of which the dream of this reality is emerging moment by moment. So, a core idea. We live in a living universe that arises moment by moment as a unified whole. And that's coming both from the lens of science as well as the lens of spirituality. And we can say the power of now comes from realizing that in the now, not only do we experience the lateral connectivity of our awakening, we experience the emergent connectivity of our emergent connection with a living universe that's giving birth to itself, moment by moment. So the ancient wisdom of non-duality is now beginning to connect with the insights from modern science. And for that to emerge in the world, we can see that it's happening. This is extraordinary. I've been watching this now for decades. In 1962, a study was done by the New York Times said, have you ever had a mystical experience where you felt at home in the universe, where you felt love at the foundations of the universe, where you felt like you belonged here? 22% of the adult population in the United States said, yeah, I've had that experience. And year by year, this has been followed by different studies. Half a century later, essentially, 2009, instead of 22%, it's 49% of the American adult population has said, yeah, I've had that experience, that mystical experience of connection, of communion with the living universe. We're waking up. This is happening. And it's measurably happening year by year. Now, for this awakening to spread throughout the world is going to require a great transition on the earth, an extraordinary transformation. It's going to involve, and we're in the midst of it, I feel right now, a global systems crisis, a rite of passage through the fire of initiation into a new world, a new world circumstance. And so quickly going through some of the elements of the global systems crisis that we're facing right now, for example, climate disruption. Right now, there's a hurricane headed towards Mexico that's the strongest hurricane ever recorded in human history. It is going to wreak catastrophe on the people of Mexico. And we could spend, obviously, hours speaking about the impact of climate change and climate disruption, but we are in the midst of the beginnings of a profound change of life on the earth because of climate disruption. That factor alone is going to take us into a global systems crisis. Resource depletion. We're pumping out the aquifers, the groundwater, at the same time that the glaciers are melting, the snowpack is dwindling, and water is one of the most precious resources that we have on this earth. Species extinction, Drew was mentioning this. We're in the midst of the 6th largest extinction of species that the earth has ever known. And these other species aren't just interesting animals and plants out there. They're an integral part of a biosphere that's being challenged in its integrity. That's food, basically. Plants and animals, that's food. So the species extinction is really compromising our ability to live sustainably on this earth. Environmental pollution. We can see this, for example, in the acidification of the world's oceans and the die-off of the coral reefs, and that's essentially integral to the biosphere of the world's coral reefs and the integrity of the world's oceans, and the oceans are dying. Unsustainable population. When I was born, 2.2 billion people lived on the earth. Now there are over 7 billion people. That means in my lifetime, world population has more than tripled. And if I'm lucky to live just a while longer, it will quadruple in my lifetime. And if you would imagine you were an urban planner for the earth, your job would be month by month to take a city the size of Chicago, Philadelphia, metropolitan Los Angeles, 7 million people, and every month, find a place for 7 million, 7 million, 7 million, 7 million. That's the rate at which we are growing the population on this earth. It's been estimated again and again that the carrying capacity of the earth is roughly 2 billion people with a middle-class lifestyle and a healthy biosphere. If we have 7 billion going towards 9, maybe even 11, we are at least 7 billion people over carrying capacity, and that means we either give up the middle-class lifestyle or we give up 7 billion lives. That is a global systems crisis. The product of that is already we're seeing food shortages, famine, and that's driving the largest refugee crisis in part since World War II. And we're just beginning. We're just beginning to create this global systems crisis. Now, to move from crisis into a more healthy future, we need a new story. Drew was talking about this. Our story is our future. What is the story? The American dream is becoming the world's nightmare. What is the story that is a story of a more promising future? We need a story that's stories that are universal. Everyone on the earth should be able to understand it. Simple, emotionally powerful, you care about it, evocative of our higher human potentials as a human family. Let me suggest a few. First, Awaken activism. We'll come to story in a minute. 5 areas of Awaken activism to respond to a world and systems crisis. First is choosing more sustainable ways of living. And I've done a lot of work on simplicity of living, and a core conclusion is that consumerism makes sense in a dead universe. What matters most is matter. The more matter you have, the more you must matter. On the other hand, simplicity makes sense in a living universe. What matters most is your connection with the aliveness and getting rid of the clutter and complexity that gets in the way of that connection. Another area of Awaken activism is building new forms of community. Co-housing and eco-villages. This picture is taken from a co-housing community that my wife and I lived in for several years, not so far from here. And co-housing and eco-villages can aggregate into a larger creation, that of transition towns and resilient communities. Third area of Awaken activism is awakening our collective consciousness. And the global brain is now waking up. 3.2 billion people now have access to the internet. By 2020, it'll be 5 billion people have access to the internet, and Earth voice movement can emerge. The Earth can have a voice that transcends the gridlock of nation-state politics. A fourth area of Awaken activism is what I was mentioning earlier, creating great transition stories. The first is humanity is growing up. Story I've been asking people about all around the world. Around the world, people say, yeah, we're acting like teenagers. We're acting like adolescents at the species level. And if we move into our early adulthood, we're going to create a new relationship with the earth, with one another, and with the universe. Another powerful story is that we are midwifing our time of planetary birth. And women that I have spoken to have said, let me tell you about the birth process. It's painful, it's difficult. There's contraction, relaxation, and finally there is the water breaking and the unstoppable movement towards new life. And so here we are in the process of contraction, relaxation, and moving towards that moment when the unstoppable birth of new life begins. And lastly, another story, very powerful for our times, fostering truth and reconciliation. Here we have Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu that took South Africa from apartheid to democracy without going through a civil war, because they were willing to foster truth and reconciliation. And we need to do that. We are so divided as a species between men and women, the rich and the poor, between different religious traditions, between our species and other species, between our generation and future generations. We deeply need a time of truth and reconciliation. The last area of Awaken activism, very important, often ignored, is that we need to be mindful of and working with the trauma of transition. That means we need to acknowledge confusion and chaos, guilt and blame, anger and conflict, sorrow and grieving, that will hopefully then lead to acceptance and reconciliation. So what is the Great Transition? It's going from a process of profound separation over the last 50,000 years, growing empowerment, individuation, differentiation. We have become so successful, we're now moving into a time of great initiation, the fire of initiation, and that's what we see as a global systems crisis. And if we're capable of moving through this fire of initiation, we'll come out the other side in a time of integration, and that will be not only integration with one another as a human family, but with the universe that is our larger home. And deeply what we are learning to do is how to live in a living universe. And understand that the living universe also lives within us. This is my granddaughter, Anna. So, if you want to learn more, please go to my website, DuaneElgin.com, and there's a copy of my book. And thank you so much.